When her little girl lost her life in a horrific house fire, she convinced herself it had been a tragic accident born of her own carelessness. She'd forgotten to switch off the gas before leaving, and the guilt crushed her. She stumbled through the funeral plans, barely functioning, and yet at the service something about her ex-husband's behavior struck her as off. His gaze felt too impassive, his expression too calm for a father in mourning. What seemed at first to be nothing more than a misunderstanding would soon expose a devastating truth about her daughter's fate and reveal the real face of the man she'd once trusted. But before we get into this shocking saga, drop a comment to tell us where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy this video, hit subscribe. The funeral home lay hushed, interrupted only by occasional sniffles and the soft hum of the air conditioning. At the front, a polished mahogany casket gleamed under gentle lights. Beside it, a framed photo of little Lena Brooks captured her radiant smile, her short blonde hair, and those huge brown eyes that could melt any heart. Underneath, the dates read March 15th, 2022, May 10th, 2024. She was only 2. As the service drew to a close, Ellie Brooks stood before the casket, her eyes fixed on her daughter's serene face one last time. Tears silently carved paths down her cheeks, staining the collar of her black dress. The makeup she'd painstakingly applied that morning to conceal the healing burn on her right cheek was beginning to smudge, unveiling patches of reddened skin. Lena lay dressed in her favorite pink lace-trimmed dress, and with that image, memories of the fire that claimed her flickered through Ellie's mind. It had been only 3 days ago, yet it felt like an eternity. That morning had begun like any other. Ellie and Lena had gone grocery shopping, and Lena insisted on pushing her tiny child-sized cart. She beamed as she placed apples and a box of her beloved cereal inside, delighting in her small victories. At checkout, the cashier rewarded her with a sticker, and Lena chatted away in her car seat all the way home about her new prize. Pulling into the driveway, Ellie unclasped her daughter's seatbelt and watched her scamper up the front steps into the house while she unloaded the groceries. She'd admired how independent Lena was becoming, always wanting to do things on her own. Ellie had just reached for the last bag when she heard a scream. At first, she assumed it was one of Lena's tantrums. Her toddler would grow impatient when Ellie lingered outdoors, craving her mother's full attention. But when the shriek shifted from frustration to pure terror, a bolt of panic shot through Ellie. She dropped the bag and sprinted toward the front door. As she opened it, a wave of thick black smoke hit her in the face. Through the haze, she caught sight of flames dancing in the kitchen, and there, in the heart of the inferno, stood Lena, her tiny frame outlined by the blaze. Ellie froze, paralyzed by shock. Precious seconds slipped away as her mind fought to process the nightmarish scene. Then, snapping into action, she bolted back to the car, grabbed her phone, and dialed emergency services with trembling fingers. "Fire!" she shrieked into the receiver. "My daughter's inside!" The dispatcher's calm voice guided her. "Give the address. Help is coming." But Ellie couldn't wait. She charged back inside, hacking through the smoke as she groped for the fire extinguisher. When she found it, the pressure gauge sat dead in the red. She tossed it aside and crawled toward the kitchen for the fire blanket, but visibility was gone, and her lungs burned. She called Lena's name over and over until the fire crew arrived. By then, half the living room had been consumed. They dragged Ellie out as she thrashed and screamed, desperate to get to her child. One firefighter held her back while 2 more plunged into the blaze to find Lena. Ellie stumbled onto the front lawn without shoes, her cheek, ear, and forearm blistered and raw. Neighbors clustered at the curb, some offering blankets, others watching in paralyzed horror as flames swallowed the suburban home. Minutes later, the firefighters emerged, carrying Lena's small, limp body. Ellie crumpled to her knees, staring at soot-blackened skin and burn wounds that covered her daughter's tiny frame. Both were rushed to the hospital, but despite every effort, Lena succumbed to her injuries and smoke inhalation the next morning. Ellie never left her side. As the heart monitor flatlined and the doctors declared the time of her daughter's passing, something deep inside Ellie shattered too. A gentle hand on her shoulder drew her back from the edge of that moment, and she turned to see Orland, her ex-husband, standing beside her. His dark suit was immaculate, his hair neatly styled. Even though they'd divorced 2 years earlier, they'd kept things civil for Lena's sake. "It's time," he said quietly. Ellie nodded and stepped aside, allowing the priest to approach the casket. Through blurred vision, she watched the lid slowly descend, the soft click of the latch reverberating through her soul as if sealing away a part of herself. Beside her, her sister Margot stood composed in a tailored black pantsuit, red-rimmed from tears, a professional camera hanging around her neck. At first, Ellie had resisted the idea of photographing the service, but Margot insisted, saying that one day these images might mean everything. Margot wrapped Ellie in a firm embrace, whispering, "It's okay to grieve. Take your time. I'm here with you." Leaning into her sister's strength, Ellie felt a small measure of comfort, even as the priest's final prayers drifted past her like a distant echo. When the line of mourners approached, friends and family offering hugs, handshakes, and the familiar condolences of "she's with the angels now" and "time will heal," Ellie thanked them automatically, her mind elsewhere. She barely registered the announcement that Lena's cremation would occur tomorrow at 10 a.m., a choice Ellie had made to keep her daughter's ashes close at home rather than leave her alone in a cemetery. As the guests filed out, the funeral home fell silent once more. Ellie whispered a soft thanks to the priest and gave Orland a tired smile. "You can stay at my place for a while," he offered gently, "until you decide what to do with the house." Ellie shook her head. "Thank you, but I'll stay with Margot." Margot, gathering her camera gear, nodded. "Of course, stay as long as you need, sis." Orland accepted her choice with a solemn nod. "If you need anything, call me." The three of them walked through the sunlit parking lot in awkward silence. The bright afternoon light, the kind photographers call magic hour, glistened off the funeral home's Victorian facade and the turning maple leaves, but Ellie saw only shadows. Margot paused now and then to capture shots of the architecture and autumn-hued trees. "The light is perfect," she murmured to herself as she adjusted her lens. Ellie remained silent, her thoughts trapped inside that closed casket. Nearing Margot's sleek silver Volvo, Margot reviewed her photos on the camera's screen. Some she approved, others she discarded with a frown. She hit the back button by mistake, and an image from inside the funeral chapel appeared. Ellie standing beside the coffin, her shoulders slumped, and behind her, Orland, wearing an expression that wasn't grief, but something colder, almost triumphant. Margot's brow furrowed. "Ellie!" she called out, her voice edged with alarm. Ellie looked up, worry sharpening her features. "Look at this," Margot said, as she climbed into the driver's seat and handed Ellie the camera. Ellie sighed, leaning back against the door. "Not now, Margot," she mumbled. "I can't face pictures." "No," Margot insisted. "You have to see this one." Ellie slowly scrolled to the frame Margot had flagged. As she studied Orland's eerie smile, a knot of dread formed in her chest. "Why is Orland?" she whispered, her voice trailing off as realization began to dawn. "Smiling like that behind my back?" Ellie's voice dropped to a fierce whisper as she studied the photograph. The curve of Orland's lips, so out of place at such a somber event, sent a chill through her. She lingered on the image, her frown deepening. There was something undeniably off about that grin, yet her grief was too raw for deeper scrutiny. "It must just be a fluke," she finally murmured, shutting off the camera. "People get caught in odd expressions when you snap them unexpectedly." Margot's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "That's no ordinary expression, Ellie. Look at how cold it is." Irritation flared in Ellie's chest. She'd made her boundaries clear. No more photo sessions, no more dissection of her ex's every move. "Orland and I are divorced, yes," she snapped, but we've stayed civil for Lena's memory. He attended the funeral because he cared. Margot refused to relent as she eased the car out of its spot. I'm worried you're too vulnerable right now. He could be taking advantage of that kindness. Ellie's voice rose. Taking advantage? By giving me a place to stay after my house burned down? By showing up at his daughter's funeral? Their argument spiraled, unearthing old wounds. Margot dredged up marriage day grievances, while Ellie accused her sister of never giving Orland a fair chance. When they reached the edge of the funeral complex, Ellie's patience snapped. Stop the car. Margot shot her a stunned look. Where would you go? That's not your concern. Margot hesitated only a moment before pulling over. This is absurd, she muttered as Ellie unbuckled her seatbelt. Where are you off to? I'll figure it out. With that, Ellie flung the door open and stepped into the golden afternoon, the click echoing finality. Barely had she put distance between herself and the Volvo when a sleek black Mercedes purred to a halt behind her. Orland emerged, concern etched on his face. Everything okay? He asked, noting her tense posture and the empty passenger seat of Margot's car rolling off down the road. Just sister drama, Ellie sighed, tugging at her hair. I won't be staying with Margot after all. Orland nodded as though he understood without words. Get in, he offered gently. My place is still open. With few options, her home gone, her bond with Margot stretched thin, and no one else to turn to, Ellie hesitated only briefly before climbing into the passenger seat. She watched Margot's Volvo shrink in the distance, a pang of regret twisting her pride into silence. Orland slid behind the wheel, filling the car with the familiar scent of his cologne, once comforting, now tinged with something sharp. They drove in heavy quiet, classical Bach drifting from the premium stereo. Ellie had never shared his taste in music, but tonight, even contemporary songs felt incongruous. After several minutes, Orland broke the hush. Do you want to talk about what happened with Margot? Ellie shook her head. Sibling fights, nothing more. If it changes your mind about staying with her, then it's something worth discussing. Ellie's jaw set. I need calm tonight. Between losing Lena, the funeral, and tomorrow's cremation, I can't handle more conflict. I'll face our issues later. Orland fell silent again, then gently asked, Your burns, your cheek and ear, are they healing okay? And your arms and legs? The unexpected question pulled Ellie from her reverie. She hadn't even considered her own recovery in days. Ellie's own injuries had barely registered amid her overwhelming grief for Lena. The burns on her right arm still throbbed painfully, demanding daily cleaning and fresh dressings, and her legs itched as the minor burns scabbed over. Yet physically, she would recover. Her daughter would not. They're healing, she answered briefly, staring out at the suburban street sliding past. Orland sensed her reluctance and fell silent again. They rode the rest of the way in quiet, each lost in memory. As the middle-class neighborhoods gave way to gated, upscale enclaves, Ellie remembered that Orland had relocated here after the divorce. His new home was all glass walls and sharp lines, a bachelor's showcase, never intended for a child. They passed through the guarded entrance, where the doorman nodded at Orland. Ellie felt her strength ebb away. Today's emotional weight was finally catching up to her. Almost there, Orland murmured, glancing her way. He offered a gentle reassurance, but Ellie could only nod, too drained to speak. Pulling into the driveway of a pristine two-story house, Orland killed the engine, and the sudden silence pressed in. The garage's echoing emptiness stood in stark contrast to her own now ruined home, where Lena's toys lay scattered across the lawn and crayon masterpieces still clung to the fridge. Orland unbuckled his seatbelt and led her through the immaculate space, past a kitchen of polished concrete and chrome, down a hallway hung with abstract canvases, and up a staircase to a spare bedroom. Neutral tones, a plush bed, a sitting nook by the window. Everything looked untouched. "This is yours," he said, stepping aside. "The bathroom's through that door, fresh towels in the cabinet, and I can lend you some clothes." Ellie dropped her purse on the minimalist nightstand. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you need anything, I'm downstairs," Orland added. "My room's down the hall and my office is off the living room." Ellie ran a hand through her hair. "I'll probably rest today. I haven't slept and I need energy for tomorrow's cremation." Orland nodded and left her to herself. Once alone, Ellie perched on the bed's edge, phone in hand. She saw a new message from Margot. "I'm so sorry for pressuring you today. I should have respected your grief. But that photo still worries me. People don't smile at funerals like that. I've reattached it. Please be careful. Love you." Ellie opened the image again. It showed her bent over Lena's casket, every mourner's face mournful, except Orland's, his lips curved in a smirk, his eyes locked on the back of Ellie's head with an almost predatory gleam. Zooming in, she forced herself to consider if it was merely a fleeting expression. But there was nothing fleeting about that deliberate, misplaced grin. It was done on purpose, cold, unsettling, triumphant. She set the phone aside and lay back, her head sinking into the pillow, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Thoughts of the fire surged in her mind, her endless what-ifs. If only she'd heeded Lena's first scream instead of dismissing it as a tantrum. If only she'd shaken herself out of shock and called for help sooner. If only she'd kept the extinguisher up to date and the blanket within reach. The weight of regret pressed down as deeply as her sorrow. If only she'd been a better mother, Lena might still be here. The thought stabbed at Ellie's heart as tears welled and splashed onto the pillow, soaking into her hair. Grief pressed on her chest like a physical weight, making each breath a struggle until exhaustion claimed her. Her final waking thought was of Orland's unsettling smirk in that photograph, and Margot's warning to watch her back, before darkness offered a merciful escape. When Ellie came to, her head throbbed, and her mouth was parched. Blinking up at unfamiliar ceiling, it took a moment to remember she was in Orland's guest room. Then the day's tragedies flooded back. She sat up gingerly, wincing as pain flared through her temples. A glance at the clock told her it was 1:30 p.m. She'd been out for only half an hour, yet it felt like ages. She reached for her phone on the bed, but it was gone. The covers were neatly pulled up and a blanket draped over her shoulders, a kind gesture, but one that made her heart flutter with unease. Rising slowly, she padded into the hall. Sounds drifted up from downstairs, so she followed them to the dining area, where Orland was laying out food. "You're awake," he said with a gentle smile. "I thought you might be hungry. You haven't eaten since morning." Ellie surveyed the simple, inviting spread, sandwiches, fresh fruit, a light salad, and Orland returned with a steaming mug. "Spiced apple tea," he explained. A colleague from India swore by its soothing properties. Ellie accepted the mug, savoring its warmth, but set it down, reluctant to drink until she found her phone. "Did you see it?" she asked. "I left it here." Orland nodded toward a plate. Her phone lay beside it. "It was ringing nonstop. I didn't want to wake you." Ellie bristled at his assumption. Touching her things without asking felt invasive, even for someone who'd once shared her life. "I'm sorry," Orland added quickly. "I only meant to let you rest." Ellie retrieved the device and saw several missed calls from Margot. Guilt coiled in her gut. Orland urged her to sit and eat while the tea cooled. Tentatively, Ellie sipped the fragrant brew, cinnamon and clove with an unfamiliar sweetness, and nibbled at her food. The taste eluded her, but each small bite steadied her nerves. By the time she'd finished half a sandwich, she felt marginally stronger. Across the table, Orland watched her with that inscrutable look, equal parts concern and something darker. Finally, Ellie broke the silence. "You saw the photo when you picked up my phone." Orland's nod was almost imperceptible. I did. I'm sorry for going through your calls. Ellie drew a breath. That image sparked my fight with Margot. She thought you were smiling at the funeral, at our daughter's funeral. Orland leaned back, expression neutral. I know how it looked, he said, waving it off. I meant it as a comforting gesture, a bittersweet moment. Ellie's brow furrowed. Comforting? At a funeral? Orland's jaw tightened. People respond to stress in different ways. Nervous laughter, awkward smiles. It doesn't mean anything sinister. Ellie's voice rose. Not you. When you're nervous, you go quiet. You don't grin like you've won something. Orland snapped. Let's not turn this into something it isn't. You're upset. Understandably so. But we're inventing problems. Ellie stood, her earlier reserve replaced by anger. Perhaps Margot had been right. Ellie's words tumbled out before she could stop them. You never truly connected with Lena from the start. I always thought it was because you were busy, not hands-on. But maybe that's why you didn't feel the same grief. Orland's face twisted in hurt. That's unfair, he countered, forcing himself to stay calm. Smiling at her funeral doesn't mean I didn't love Lena. She was my daughter too, and she adored my smile. For a moment, Ellie hesitated, recalling his long struggle with infertility and how they'd fought to conceive her only child, then lost any chance at more. I can't do this anymore, she whispered, massaging her temples. I need air. But when she tried to leave the room, Orland planted himself in her path. You're not going anywhere, he said, voice low and controlled, the same tone he'd used during arguments in their marriage. You have no right to stop me, Ellie insisted, straightening her shoulders despite a rising dread. I'm not your wife. His eyes narrowed. You're not leaving my sight again, Ellie. A chill crawled up her spine. What do you mean? She asked, voice barely a breath. Orland's lips curved into the same menacing half-smile from the photograph. Then I'll send you where Lena is, he threatened, and in that moment, Ellie realized with horror he meant to kill her. She staggered backward to the sofa, the world tilting beneath her. You killed our daughter? She whispered, her mind reeling. Orland's admission came in a surprisingly calm voice. I leaked the gas, set the fire when you two went shopping. I watched you. Ellie sank onto the edge of the sofa, numb with disbelief. You were stalking us? You murdered our child? Orland's grip on the flip knife loosened as he continued. I didn't intend to hurt her. I just wanted us back together, a family. When you divorced me and she was yours, my life ended. His confession echoed in the oppressive silence, leaving Ellie trapped between terror and heartbreak as Margot's frantic knocking reverberated through the locked door. He insisted that his actions sprang not from malice, but from an overwhelming need to reclaim the family he had lost, explaining in a voice trembling with anguish that when he saw Ellie laughing with another man and Lena scurrying into her arms as she always did, he felt utterly displaced, and so, in his twisted desperation, he tampered with the gas line to force them back to him, never intending harm to the child. Ellie's scream of disbelief tore through him like a dagger. You burned down our home? You murdered our daughter out of jealousy? He shouted, slamming a hand against the wall in fury, insisting it had been a mistake, that he had never meant Lena any real harm, only wanted Ellie to lean on him again. She recoiled, horror and rage igniting in her chest. You set fire to the house to win me back, knowing full well what might happen to Lena. She spat, her voice shaking with grief as the truth settled like ice in her veins. Orland's eyes darkened as he raged about custody, about how Margot had turned Ellie against him, about how he had been robbed of his family, and though he protested he hadn't killed anyone, Ellie's voice rang clear. You murdered a 2-year-old child because you couldn't bear to see us happy without you, she said, and the words hung between them, undeniable. At that moment, Margot burst into the room, her face a mask of fear as she took in Orland's gleaming knife and Ellie's tear-streaked face. "What the hell is happening?" she demanded, and Orland's calm response, "No one leaves this house," sent a fresh surge of terror through Ellie. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, and as Orland lunged at Margot, she tried to retreat, but Ellie leapt between them, only to be flung aside with brutal force and land hard on the hardwood, the coffee table crashing behind her. "Run!" Ellie gasped, and as Margot sprinted toward the back door with her, Orland's footsteps pounded just behind. They barely reached the threshold when a searing pain ripped through Ellie's calf. A knife had found its mark, and she collapsed, screaming as Margot turned to help. But Orland was already there, tearing the blade free from Ellie's leg and lunging at Margot with murderous intent, his eyes alight with a madness neither sister could have imagined. Ellie watched in horror as Orland drove the knife into Margot's abdomen with savage force. Margot's eyes went wide in shock, her lips parting in a silent scream. "No!" Ellie screamed, dragging herself across the floor despite her wounded leg. "Orland, stop!" But he was beyond reason, plunging the blade into Margot again and again as he hissed, "You did this! You did this!" Ellie lunged forward, grasping his arm, but her strength failed her. Orland shoved her aside and continued his frenzy until the front door exploded inward and police commands rang out. "Drop the weapon! Hands where we can see them!" Orland froze, momentarily dazed by the shouts. Then, as officers flooded the room, he flung the knife toward them. It clanged harmlessly against the wall, and they tackled him, wrestling him into handcuffs. Ellie crawled to Margot's side, cradling her sister's limp form and pressing her shaking hand over the worst wound. "Margot, stay with me," she sobbed. "Help is here." But Margot's eyes fluttered, and her breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. "We need an ambulance!" Ellie screamed at the officers, who were already radioing for medics. One kneeled beside them, applying pressure to the bleeding wounds. "They're a few minutes out," he announced, voice tight with concern. "Hang on." Ellie clung to Margot's hand. "Don't leave me." "I'm so sorry." As Orland was hauled away, eyes locked on Ellie in a final, murderous glare. She saw not the man she'd loved, but a psychopath, the same monster who'd smiled at their daughter's funeral, set the house ablaze, and killed her child. Margot's life hung in the balance, the sirens outside a cruel reminder that help had arrived too late. When Ellie next opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed, the antiseptic tang of disinfectant in her nostrils and the rhythmic beep of monitors lulling her back to consciousness. White walls and harsh fluorescent lights greeted her as she tried to sit up, only to be halted by a stab of pain in her leg. A nurse hurried over. "Easy," she soothed, easing Ellie back against the pillows. "You lost a lot of blood, and your wound was just stitched." Ellie clutched the nurse's arm. "My sister, Margot Brooks, is she okay?" The nurse's compassionate face gave nothing away. "The doctor will see you soon and explain everything." Tears welled as Ellie realized what that meant. First Lena, now Margot, both taken by the same madman. Moments later, Dr. Patel entered, clipboard in hand and sorrow in his eyes. "Miss Brooks," he began gently, "you're awake. I'm Dr. Patel at Good Samaritan Hospital. You have a deep laceration on your right calf, but we repaired it without damaging major arteries. You'll need physical therapy, but you should regain full function." Ellie swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper. "What about my sister?" Dr. Patel's eyes darkened with regret. "I'm very sorry, Miss Brooks. Margot suffered multiple stab wounds to her abdomen and chest. She lost a great deal of blood before the ambulance arrived. Despite the medic's best efforts, Margot developed sepsis and couldn't be saved. Hearing that she was gone felt like reliving Lena's loss all over again, an agony far worse than any surgical scar." Ellie curled into herself on the hospital bed, rocking gently as Dr. Patel's sympathetic hand rested on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he murmured. The authorities have been notified and will speak with you when you're ready. Take all the time you need. But time didn't heal. It only deepened her despair. First Lena, now Margot, both taken by the same man she once called husband. Ellie lay staring at the ceiling, each beep of the monitors echoing her heartbreak, until a soft knock announced two detectives. Detective Sarah Collins, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, and her partner, Detective Mike Ramirez, stepped into the room. "Ms. Brooks," Collins began gently, "we know this is devastating, but we need your account of today's events." Ellie swallowed, her voice hollow. "He killed them both, my daughter and my sister." Collins pulled up a chair while Ramirez stood, pen poised. Ellie recounted everything: the funeral, the photo argument, choosing to go with Orland, his confession to the arson that claimed Lena's life, and the brutal attack on Margot. "He said he wanted to force me back to him," she explained, tears shining in her eyes. "He couldn't bear to see me move on." "We'll need a formal statement later," Collins said, "but this matches the scene at Brooks's home. What else did you find?" "Drug paraphernalia in his bedroom," Ramirez replied. "Preliminary blood tests suggest methamphetamine use, which could explain his paranoia and violence." Ellie shook her head. Drugs may have fueled it, but his controlling nature was there long before. A nurse arrived with pain medication. "I don't want to be sedated," Ellie protested. "I have to arrange cremations." Collins interjected softly. "You need to care for yourself too." Reluctantly, Ellie accepted. Before leaving, the detectives reassured her. Orland Brooks was in custody, booked for Margot's murder and assault on Ellie. Once his confession is verified, he'll face arson and murder charges for Lena's death too. "He's looking at life without parole," Ramirez promised. Though justice loomed, it offered little comfort. Bodies wouldn't return, the home remained in ashes, and her heart was irreparably broken. Yet Ellie felt a spark of resolve. She would endure, see him held accountable, and somehow learn to live with a grief that would never fully fade. The next morning, shafts of sunlight slanted through the blinds, painting golden stripes across Ellie's bed. She'd slept fitfully, jostled between nurse visits and pain. Her leg throbbed, but the emotional wound ached far more. As she stared at the ceiling, Dr. Patel's familiar knock sounded at the door, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks," Dr. Patel greeted her gently as he entered. "How are you feeling today?" It sounded almost absurd under the weight of everything she'd endured, but Ellie understood he meant her physical state. "My leg hurts," she admitted. "I'll manage." Dr. Patel nodded, inspecting the bandages. "The repair went smoothly, and there's no sign of infection, which is our main concern. We'd like to keep you another 24 hours for observation." Ellie's jaw set. "I need to leave today," she said firmly. "I have funeral arrangements to make." Seeing the determination in her eyes, Dr. Patel sighed with sympathy. "I understand, but your body needs rest. Perhaps someone else could handle the arrangements for you?" Ellie's voice broke. "There's no one else. My sister is dead. My daughter is dead. I'm the only one left to see to them." Dr. Patel hesitated, then acquiesced. "I'll prepare your discharge papers, but you must follow up in 3 days and use a cane, or, better, crutches." A few hours later, Ellie rang the funeral home. Henson, who had overseen Lena's service, answered with professional courtesy that shifted into genuine compassion when he learned of Margot's fate. "Miss Brooks, I'm deeply sorry. The police reached out about postponing Lena's cremation." Ellie's voice was steady despite the ache in her throat. "I'd like a joint service for Lena and Margot if possible. I'll discuss details when I'm discharged." "Mr." Henson paused, then replied gently, "We can arrange that. I'll meet you this afternoon. Would tomorrow work?" "I can't wait longer," Ellie said softly. "They need to rest." Mr. Henson's voice remained calm. "We'll make it happen." Next, Ellie called her insurance company to start a claim for her destroyed home. The representative was sympathetic, but warned that settlement could take months, especially now that the fire was part of a criminal investigation. Then, Ellie phoned hotels until she found one she could afford and booked a room for 2 weeks to give her time to find something permanent. When a discharge nurse arrived with her paperwork, Ellie felt a thread of control return. Detective Collins had arranged to pick her up at noon to help with logistics, a kindness Ellie desperately needed. True to her word, Collins arrived carrying a duffel bag filled with toiletries, fresh clothes, and even a simple black dress suitable for a funeral. Social services put this together, Collins explained. You lost everything in the fire. Ellie's eyes blurred with tears. Thank you, she whispered. With Collins' help, she changed into the dress and limped out of the hospital, leaning heavily on her cane. Pain shot through her leg with every step, but it grounded her. Physical discomfort was easier to navigate than the abyss in her heart. Once safely in the detective's car, Collins asked, "Shall we head to the funeral home?" Ellie nodded. Yes, I need to finalize the details. At the funeral home, Mr. Henson greeted them with quiet dignity and led Ellie to his office. They discussed music, readings, order of service, and the logistics of cremation. Then he guided Ellie and Collins into the chapel where, just 2 days ago, only Lena's small white casket had stood. Now, side by side, were 2 coffins, the tiny one for Lena and a larger one for Margot, each surrounded by fresh, vibrant floral displays. Those flowers came from the police department and hospital staff, Collins explained softly, pointing out bouquets arranged with care by colleagues who had treated Ellie and Margot. Ellie approached the caskets, her cane making uneven taps on the polished floor. She placed a trembling hand on each lid, letting the tears flow freely. In just a few days, she had lost her child, her sister, her home, and her sense of safety, all at the hands of the man she once loved. I'd like to see them, Ellie murmured, voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Henson hesitated, concern clouding his expression. Mrs. Brooks, given Margot's injuries and the circumstances, I'd strongly advise against— I need to say goodbye, Ellie interrupted firmly. To both of them, properly. After a brief pause, Mr. Henson nodded. Of course, Detective Collins, would you assist Mrs. Brooks? Collins offered Ellie her arm. Whenever you're ready. They entered the first viewing room alone. There lay Lena, small and serene in her pink lace-trimmed dress, the very one she had worn to her funeral. The sight took Ellie's breath away. Then they moved to Margot's room. Margot looked peaceful, her features softened by skillful makeup that concealed the worst of the trauma. She was dressed in her favorite blue. Ellie's eyes stung with sorrow and love. Ellie pressed her hand to her heart, whispering into the quiet, I'm so sorry I couldn't save you both. I love you. Collins laid a gentle hand on Ellie's shoulder. You've done all you could. They know how much they meant to you. Ellie nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stood in the soft glow of that final farewell, steeling herself for the long road ahead. Ellie lingered beside each casket, her hand brushing over the soft fabric of Margot's blouse and the delicate pink of Lena's dress as she whispered heartfelt farewells, sorries, promises that she would see justice done. When she finally stepped back into the chapel, her face was pale, eyes bright with resolve. I'll return tomorrow for the service at 10 a.m., she told Mr. Henson. The joint funeral for Lena and Margot Brooks began the next morning exactly as Ellie had arranged. Despite the whirlwind of preparation, the chapel filled with mourners, Margot's fellow photographers, neighbors from Ellie's ruined home, Lena's daycare teachers, and uniformed officers, including Detective Collins. Ellie sat in the front row, alone yet surrounded by support, dressed in the simple black gown provided by social services. Her leg throbbed, but she declined extra pain relief. She needed a clear mind for these final goodbyes. Soft piano music drifted through the room, interspersed with readings of Margot's favorite poems. and shared memories from friends. Photographs of Lena's giggles in the park and Margot's sunsets captured through her lens stood on easels at the front. When it was her turn to speak, Ellie rose slowly, gripping her cane and searching the faces before her. Many strangers, all there to mourn. "Thank you for coming today," she began, her voice hushed yet unwavering. Lena was only 2, curious, joyful, always eager to explore. Margot was in the bloom of her life, talented, compassionate, with a ready laugh and a generous heart. They adored each other. She paused, gathering courage. "What you may not know is that both were taken from me by the same man, my ex-husband, Orland Brooks." A ripple of stunned whispers passed through the crowd, but Ellie's gaze held steady. "I share this, so they can have the truth. They deserve justice, and I will dedicate every day to making sure their story is heard." Her tone softened as she continued. "Today, though, isn't about how they died. It's about the brightness they brought into my life and the world." She spoke of Lena's insistence on rain boots, her love for strawberries, and Margot's adventurous spirit and unwavering friendship. "I don't know how to live without them," Ellie admitted, tears tracing gentle lines down her cheeks. "But I will find a way, because that's what they would want. I will remember. I will seek justice, and someday I hope to feel joy again." Silence fell, broken only by the soft sound of handkerchiefs. Ellie returned to her seat, and Detective Collins guided her gently. The service continued. The caskets were closed one final time, and both were carried away to be cremated together, just as Ellie had requested, united even in ashes. A small reception followed. Ellie greeted condolences with quiet nods and thanked well-wishers, her thoughts already turning to the legal fight ahead. As the last guests departed, Collins approached. "Ready to go?" she asked, offering her arm. Ellie leaned on her cane and nodded. "Yes, thank you." Back at the modest hotel room, the silence was absolute. Ellie sank onto the bed, the black dress still on her shoulders. Late afternoon light slanted across the carpet as she scrolled through photos. Lena building a sandcastle, Margot showing her camera tips, all 3 laughing at a petting zoo last spring. Each image felt like a fragment of a vanished world. Yet, for the first time since the fire, Ellie allowed herself to imagine tomorrow, finding a new home, deciding whether to return to teaching, and piecing a life back together from these ashes. It seemed impossible, but glancing at Lena and Margot's shared laughter, a tiny spark of determination kindled within her. She would survive. She would see justice done, and someday she would honor their memories by learning to live again. As stars winked into the night sky, Ellie whispered into the darkness, "I will remember. I will survive. I will make sure your story is told and your lives honored." And in that promise, she found the first faint glimmer of hope.